Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mrs. Ross Does Math. The lesson today that I'll be reviewing is the Pythagorean Theorem. This is lesson 16 and the class is Math 8. The Pythagorean Theorem is one of my absolute favorite things to teach because it has so many applications within the real world, and I certainly hope that you love it as much as I do. So, to begin with, we are going to go ahead and review our notes. I've got a couple examples for you, and then I'm going to get you started on your assignment for this lesson. Again, this is lesson 16, the Pythagorean Theorem, and we have our essential question: how can I use the Pythagorean Theorem to find the missing side lengths in right triangles? Now, when we talk about a right triangle, we talk about a triangle that looks like this. Now, we know it's a right triangle because of this box here. That's our 90-degree angle. And when we talk about a triangle, specifically a right triangle, we have leg here, we have a leg here, and we have the hypotenuse. Now, the hypotenuse is something you guys know of as the longest leg in a triangle. Well, in a right triangle, the hypotenuse is always opposite of the right angle. So if you were to draw an arrow going from the edge of the right angle outward, you would be able to find your hypotenuse. Now, the reason why I have A, B, and C there is because in your equation that you're going to be using with Pythagorean Theorem, you're going to need to be identifying the different parts of a triangle, and then you're going to have to put them into an equation. So, when we talk about the Pythagorean Theorem, we talk about a right triangle where the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs is equals to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. In other words, leg A squared plus leg B squared equals the hypotenuse C squared, otherwise known as A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Now, this equation is going to be your best friend. So on your assignment today, we are going to be writing it down. You are going to get to know this equation very, very well. Now, when we talk about the Pythagorean Theorem, we talk about using it to find a leg, using it to find a hypotenuse. In forestry, you can use it to identify the height of a tree simply by knowing later on the angles and the distance of where you're standing in relation to the tree. This is used a lot in construction, so there's a lot of real-world applications to this formula. Now, what I have for you today is our first example, and in this first example, your task is to find the hypotenuse in a right triangle with leg lengths 9 and 12 inches. Now, I have the words here, but sometimes it's easiest to see it if we also view it as a diagram. So I have this. We have a right triangle. I've drawn a right triangle. We have a leg, which is 9. That's going to be leg A. Now, it doesn't really matter which leg right now is either A or B. What matters is that we always find the hypotenuse first. Now, the hypotenuse, once again, is always across from our right angle. So, I want to find the hypotenuse. That's a question mark. Now, I have legs 9 and 12, so that I'm going to put as 9 for A and 12 as B. Because I have an equation, I'm going to go through and identify all parts of that equation before I start solving this. Now that I've been able to identify the different parts to our equation, I'm going to rewrite the formula for Pythagorean Theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Now, instead of A, I'm going to put 9. So I'm going to go 9 squared. Instead of B, I'm going to put 12. So I'm going to put 12 squared. C, I don't know what that is, so I'm going to leave it there. So I have 9 squared plus 12 squared equals C squared. Now we're going to go ahead and combine these together. 9 squared is 81. So I'm going to write 81 12 squared is 144, and that equals c squared. Now, when we take a look at these and we add 81 plus 144 together, we get 225. So 225 equals c squared. Now, our task is to find c, the hypotenuse. What I have is c squared. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to square root my c squared, and I'm going to square root the 225 as well. And the square root of 225 is 15. So 15 equals c. So the hypotenuse of my right triangle is 15 inches. Now we need to make sure that we include that inches notation. Because we have 12 inches, we have 9 inches, we're going to include the inches in our final answer. Now sometimes we're not going to be finding the hypotenuse of a right triangle. Sometimes we're going to be finding a leg of a triangle. And that's what our next example covers. So, for this example, it says, find the missing side length. Round to the nearest tenth, 1 decimal place. So remember, that's 1 digit behind our decimal. So, helps me to have a figure, so I've got one right here. I have, once again, a right triangle. And before I begin by identifying these components, we need to see which one is C. Which one is the letter C, Charlie? So, always the hypotenuse is opposite of that 90-degree angle. So C is 11. Now, the 8 can either be A or B. Because we see it first, I'm going to go ahead and put it as A. And our B, that's what we want to find. So now using these pieces of information, we are once again going to plug them into our equation to find out what is the leg for this particular problem. So our formula is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Here, I'm going to go a squared. I'm going to plug in the 8, so we get 8 squared plus b squared. We don't know what it is, so we're going to leave it there. And that equals 11 squared, because 11 was c. Now, I'm going to go ahead and begin solving this. I'm going to first square my 8. 8 squared is 64. So I'm going to go 64 plus b squared is equals to 11 squared, which is 121. I'm going to minus the 64 from both sides, leaving me with b squared is going to be equals to 57. Now, if this was a really nice, neat number, we would just get a whole number. But this one is going to have a decimal behind it, which is why it says round to the nearest tenth. So, once again, I'm going to square root both numbers. And when I square root this, I get b is equals to 7.54. Now again, we want to round this to the nearest tenth. That's 1 digit behind the decimal. So the 4 is going to cause the 5 to stay the same. So my final answer is b is equals to 7.5. Now, if you have any questions regarding this assignment, please leave me a comment. Please send me an email. If you need to rewatch any of this, please do so before you start diving into your assignment. Now, your assignment for this lesson is lesson 16, and once again, it'll say Math 8, lesson 16, the Pythagorean Theorem. Before you start on anything, name, date, and class period, please. And also, I want every single one of you to write a squared plus b squared equals c squared at the top of your paper. Please also write c equals hypotenuse. That is very, very important. So, starting off for numbers 1 through 6, it asks us to identify the length of the hypotenuse of each triangle. Because it says the length of the hypotenuse, we know that we will always be finding C. That means we really only need to focus on A and B right now. It also says, if necessary, round to the nearest tenth. So once again, that's 1 digit behind our decimal. I'm going to start out with number 2. Now for number 2, I have 5 and 12. I know that this is going to be A, this is going to be B. If you want to have A be over 12 and the B be over 5, that's totally fine as well. But ultimately, this is C, our hypotenuse. So we need to label our figure. Next, I'm going to plug my 5 in for A, so I'm going to go 5 squared plus 12 squared for B equals C squared. 5 squared is 25. 12 squared is 144. And that's going to equal C squared. When I combine these two numbers together, I get 169 equals C squared. We're going to square root both sides of our problem. Now the square root of 169 is 13, so I'm going to get 13 equals C. Please circle your final answers in this, especially when you have to round. Next, when we take a look at number 7, it's asking us to find the length of the hypotenuse for the two given lengths. So, for the two leg lengths, my apologies. So here, we're going to plug this in just like we would any other problem. I've got A squared plus B squared equals C squared at the top. For problem A, I'm going to have 3 squared plus 4 squared equals C squared. I'm going to need to write one of these out for B, and I'm also going to need to write one of these out for C. Please make sure that you show me your work in this. Now, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16. We get C squared, that's going to give us 25 equals C squared. The square root of 25 is 5, so 5 equals C. So we're going to put 5 in right there. Now you're going to do the same process for B and C. Lastly, we're taking a look at numbers 8 through 11. In numbers 8 through 11, it asks us to find the missing measure. It does not state find the hypotenuse, find the leg. It just simply says to find the missing measure. So this is where you identifying which leg is the hypotenuse is going to be critical first. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and draw my arrows out from the right angle. And I'm always going to start by identifying what is my hypotenuse. Now I'm going to do that for 8, 9, and 10 before I do anything. So drawing out the angle, that's my C. Drawing out the angle, that's my C. Now that I've gone through and identified what C is, I know that I've got C for each one of these problems, which means now I'm going to have to find a leg. Now for me, I'm just going to go ahead and fill the rest of these in with the letter A. You could fill them all in with B, or you could do a mix of them. What that means is that I'm going to have to find a leg here. So, now this one says round to the nearest hundredth, so that's 2 digits behind the decimal. So we're going to need to be careful when we round. On number 8, I'm going to begin with 8 squared plus B squared. B is my unknown angle here, or sorry, not my unknown angle, my unknown side, and that's going to equal 17 squared. I'm going to get 64 plus B squared is equals to 17 squared, and 17 squared is 289. Now I'm going to minus 64 from both sides, and that's going to leave me with B squared equals 225. Now I'm going to have to square root both sides, leaving me with B is equals to 15. Okay, and then I'm going to circle it, and that's my final answer. Now, If I had 2 digits behind this, or I had decimals behind this, I would go ahead and round, which will be something that you'll need to do, especially on number 9. Okay. Now, once again, if you have any questions at all, please leave me a message, send me an email. I'm here to help any way I can. I have some additional videos that are also linked on my page. If you need to watch them, please do so. Thank you so very much for watching. This is Mrs. Ross Does Math.